Tonight, protesters across the country, many walked off the job or out of class, all speaking out against the decision in Ferguson, Missouri. This is President Obama just minutes ago announcing a new proposal to pour more money and police training and reform. Is there a remedy to the conflict that exists between police across the country and black communities, or is the racial divide just too deep? And Janae Rice, wife of former Baltimore Ravens player Ray Rice, speaking out about the attack that shocked the nation. She appears to be standing by her man. How's that sitting with women across the country? We'll discuss that as well. Plus, we're speaking with political reporter Alec Eisenstadt about the immigration reform and threat of a government shutdown. We'll talk about that as well. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Well, tonight we begin with the anger and frustration that's sweeping the country following that grand jury decision not to indict Officer Darren Wilson. Wilson, who, as you know, accused in the shooting death of the unarmed black teenager Michael Brown, he resigned from his post with the Ferguson Police Department. He says he fears for his safety as well as the safety of his fellow officers and family. Well, today, protesters across the country, from New York to Washington to Philly and other cities, they walked off the job in many cases and even out of class to speak out against that decision in Ferguson. And the protest even hit the gridiron. Sunday, 5 members of the St. Louis Rams raised their hands as they walked out of the tunnel onto the field to face off against the Raiders. NFL says it will not adhere to a request from the St. Louis Police Officers Association to discipline the players. But the anger across the nation, it seems to have highlighted what many of us may have suspected but didn't see in the numbers here. There's a real racial divide. Maybe not everybody wants to talk about it, but look at these numbers and tell me I'm wrong. A Huffington Post YouGov poll taken before the decision came down shows that 64% of blacks and only 22% of whites believe that Officer Darren Wilson should be punished. And 31% of whites compared to 74% of blacks believe that the officer's use of deadly force is part of a broader pattern. And many of you may have seen this piece that highlights it as well, where New York Times columnist Charles Blow says race and perception have everything to do with the fury that we are seeing across the country. Blow says 45% of African Americans, compared with just 7% of whites, believe they have had experiences of a specific instance of discrimination by the police, all because of their race. He went on to say that more than 30% of whites even acknowledge the police in most neighborhoods are more likely to use deadly force against a black person. And Blow also cited a finding by the Sentencing Project report stating that white Americans overestimate the proportion of crime committed by people of color and associate people of color with, in fact, criminality. All right, a lot to break into here, so let's bring in our panel to help us out with that. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College and professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, you know him, political journalist and author. Bishop C. Nathan Edwards, he is the pastor of the Friendship Worship Center in Mount Vernon. Bishop Edwards is also a current member and former vice president of the United Black Clergy of Westchester. And Andrew Whitman, of course, our senior political correspondent. Everybody, thank you very much. And the president in the last hour spoke out about some possible remedies, but I want to get to that in the next segment. And I'll start with you, Bishop, because I've gotten through probably 2/3, 3/4 of the grand jury report. And the thing that still struck me is, just taking New York even, I can talk about Diallo, Louima, Sean Bell. I can talk about the shooting that even happened in that stairwell in Brooklyn not long ago. There have been more egregious instances where people have been shot and killed. What about Ferguson has touched such a nerve, not just in the streets of Ferguson, but I'm sure you must have heard it from the congregation over the last few weeks, if not months. What about this case has touched such a raw nerve with so many people?
Ultimately, we believe that the prosecutor did a very poor job in doing his job because he had the responsibility to produce evidence of probable cause. We feel that he conducted his own trial using the people that were chosen, the pairs, and we feel that we have not served us rightly, and we have not experienced justice. Our community is outraged because there's a system that's in place to protect the rights of people, and particularly a young man who is unarmed. Regardless, it's a pattern. When they want to justify their wrong, they probe into the past of a person, which that had nothing to do with it. We are outraged because of this level of brutality and sensitivity to the African American community, and it is systemic. It's not just this is the straw that broke the camel's back. But this is a systemic problem within our community, where the broader community of whites feel that they have a right to have one set of rules that they live by, and we have another set of rules that they apply to us, which is inferior.
Dominic, you've covered a whole lot of these stories. The ones I mentioned, every single one of them, you've covered from both the streets and also from Police Plaza. Again, I come back to, and the bishop explained it, I thought, really well, but for me, I can point to a lot of other examples. I mean, this much we know. There was a conflict in that police car that led to the shooting. Now, people can debate whether or not the grand jury got it right, but my point is, there are other cases. I mean, look, we had a 12-year-old in Cleveland who was just shot and killed, right? There's extenuating circumstances surrounding it. I mentioned the case in Brooklyn. These are just ones in the last month. What is it about this case that, again, has touched such a nerve and still does to this day? I mean, we saw protests on the streets of major American cities to this day. The president, for the second time, did this. Just talk about him going to Ferguson directly to deal with this. What about this one case? Other black men have been shot before and killed by police. Why this one?
It's real simple to understand, and what has so many communities of color throughout the country, not only black people, white people as well, that are upset, Asian Americans that are upset, Latinos Americans, that he allegedly, no matter what this prosecutor argued, that Mr. Brown allegedly had his hands up in a surrender motion, no matter what the prosecutor claims, and that there was such a distance, a large distance. See, I think any average person, decent person will say, okay, there was a struggle in the car, that young man crossed the line. Nobody in their right mind is going to attack a police officer. But when there's a distance where the officer has safety, and yet the individual still struck 6 to 8 times with bullets, that's what no one can get over. When I was growing up, it used to be alleged that some police officers would carry throwaway guns, guns that are not marked to anybody, and if there's a controversial shooting, they put the gun in the hand of the dead suspect, or they throw it in the area to give them background. There was no gun, no weapon. So no weapon, apparently shot with his hands up, 6 bullets, shot in the head, goes to a prosecutor. Prosecutor says, I'm not presenting this case. I'm going to change the rules in the middle of the game so that we get no indictment.
The bishop also mentioned the system in all of this, and once again, you have deadly force used against an unarmed black suspect. We've seen that multiple times. But then, was the deadly force required? And then once you get past that, the body laying on the ground for hours afterwards, it didn't seem like there was a lot of care that was placed from Michael Brown's body.
Then you go to the grand. That, to me, I keep hearing from so many people, they left the body in the street for 4 hours, the sheet over him like it was a dog in the middle of the street. That point, I've heard so often.
That's the level of insensitivity that they have to the black community. Let me share this. Officer Wilson, there was an altercation in the car. The young man, Michael Brown, got the best of him. He got angry. He said, how can a Negro beat me and me not respond in a deadly way? When his hands was up, it is said that he continued.
I found the obligatory, there's a debate in the grand jury about whether the hands were up, but okay.
He continued to shoot, and as he was leaning down, he shot him in his head. Why didn't he not stop shooting the young man? Why did he continue to shoot the young man? That's why we are outraged. Why did he have to shoot him 6 and 7 times as though he was an animal? That's why we are outraged.
Gene, I'm curious, college campus, they feel this, you're hearing the same thing? This obviously has to be the most dominant topic for the last, in whatever the class is.
Yeah, we had protests on campus Tuesday, the Monday after the verdict was rendered, or the decision not to indict was rendered. So yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and obviously we're at a small campus, but nationwide you can look. I do think that, what is striking to me is what you talked about at the beginning about the huge discrepancy discrepancy between Caucasians, African Americans, and as Dominic mentioned, Latinos and Asian Americans certainly, but whites and blacks on these issues. It is striking when you look at the data. There is very little common ground on any of these issues. And so, you know, I would love to see, and you know, I know you're going to talk about the president next, but I would love to see more ways of crossing that divide. I mean, the Blow piece that you mentioned is great because he really does lay out the difference there. And I think that we have to take that divide really, really seriously, because it's not just that whites are racist or insensitive. There's a huge gulf of misunderstanding and distrust.
And you know what? The one conversation, we can talk about everything from abortion and guns and gay marriage. You talk about race, no matter what it is, people don't want to have this conversation. People don't want to have this because nobody wants to be put in either one of the two camps that are on the edges. And there it is. So the president today tried to begin that conversation. We'll see how much people are listening. We'll see if there's remedies here. And I'll talk to folks on the ground right now who can tell me where there may be common ground and how we move forward. So we'll talk about that straight ahead, right after this.